Accountable to and representing all the 10 boroughs in Greater Manchester, the Mayor steers the work of the Greater Manchester's combined authority, leading on issues such as the economy, transport, police and fire services to ensure Greater Manchester is one of the best places in the UK. Labour's Andy Burnham is the current mayor, but for how much longer? On the 2nd of May, Mancunians will take to the ballot boxes to vote for whom they want as mayor. The Conservatives Party candidate Dan Barker joins me now in the Radio Alti studios. So Dan, you're not a career politician, are you?
No, morning, Bill. No, I have spent over 20 years working in industry and private sector in civil, nuclear and defence, and so I've come into politics relatively recent. That said, I've always been interested in politics and I've always been a Conservative.
And in your opinion, what makes you qualified for the big job?
So I think I've got experience from private sector and industry. I think I've got a vision for Manchester. I think I've got a hands-on approach to delivering the job and working with people, and I think that will show in results in the mayoral role.
And that's great, but you have a strong stance against Andy Burnham. But what's wrong with the current Labour leader?
Well, I think if you look at what's actually been delivered under the 7 years of the GM mayor, it's quite hard to sort of put your finger on any single thing and say, yes, that was, it's worth having a mayor for that reason alone. And when I asked people, when I sort of was considering standing a while ago, I said, what do you think of Andy Burnham? And a lot of them said, oh yeah, good guy, they're popular. I said, well, what has he done for Manchester? And there was always a pause and the hesitation, and people had to sort of think about, well, what is there? So my kind of strapline is 7 years of failure is, what have we actually had for 7 years of Andy Burnham? What's he delivered for Manchester?
And some people may argue that the Conservatives nationally have been in power for double that time. What would you say to them?
Well, I think the Conservative government was originally our idea to create metro mayors and devolution, and we have supported Manchester. I think they're on the 7th devolution deal, giving more powers and more money to allow decisions to be made locally by local leaders with accountability. So how those get implemented locally, I think has got to be accountability's got to sit with the combined authority and the metro mayor. But what I see when I've done my research is we're just giving more and more money to Manchester, and you could look at what the devolution deal that Greater Manchester has is on a par with something like Scotland and Wales. That's how much control we have locally. Does anyone even realise that?
And before you talked about you considering the job and running for mayor, but what's the selection process like in the first place?
So you have to be in the Conservative Party for a role like mayor. You have to be on the parliamentary list. So there's quite a rigorous process there. There's quite a number of background checks for obvious reasons, and then you've got to go through a 3-stage process to get onto the list. At any stage, you can be said, thanks very much, not this time, come back again. And then finally, there was a selection process by the local Conservative associations, where they pick their candidate effectively, and that is generally how the Conservative Party works. Is it's down to the local associations to pick candidates. I know Labour seem to have a track record of parachuting candidates in from London, from their central office. I don't think that plays well with Conservatives. They want to pick their man or woman, basically.
And I've got to ask you this, but why were the last 3 sort of people running for mayor in the Conservative Party from Trafford?
We've kind of noted that, and it's not by design. There was Sean Anstey, and then obviously Laura Evans, who's helping me. And I don't know. There are other areas of Greater Manchester where there is significant Conservative support, but it just seems to come from Trafford.
So Trafford is the best place. Anyway, moving on. So what are your key priorities for Greater Manchester?
So I think the first thing I've got to say would be police and crime, because we're currently at a 7-year high for crime figures, possibly in a generation, although the way the stats have been done has changed over time. And I think it's fair to say people don't feel safe on the streets of Greater Manchester, and the stats bear that out. Violence against the person is the type of crime that dominates the statistics, which is not a good thing.
And you say violence against a person, but do you think some people may argue that women need the focus on women needs to be a lot more, built up?
Yeah, so it's within that broad category is gender-based violence or domestic abuse, that sort of thing, where generally women are the victims. So, which is why it's so important. I mean, this is not victimless, anonymous crime. This is very unpleasant, traumatic sort of crime.
And you're also against the clean air zone, Kaz. Well, why?
Well, I mean, if you look at all the other cities that have implemented a clean air zone, it was all based on the same legislation, the Clean Air Act, and there was a court case in 2015 brought by an NGO which said, the government needs to implement this, and so that went through the Supreme Court, upheld it, and all these cities where they had known issues were told, right, you need to implement a clean air zone or a solution to tackle clean air within a set time frame. Manchester was in the same boat. There was analysis done, air quality was measured, and then the combined authority and the mayor came back with a solution for the largest clean air zone in the UK, possibly in the world. I mean, it's bigger than 25 countries at 493 square miles, and it was a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Now, when it was initially mooted as an idea, I think the two areas were one in Ashton-under-Lyme and one in Wigan and Tameside were the two areas where they were the hotspots. The latest plan, it's now Manchester City Centre and Salford City Centre, which is the things, as a layperson, you'd look at that and think, yeah, that's where you'd expect the pollution to be, and where the traffic's going to be most dense. So, what's the problem we're trying to solve here in terms of clean air? And my personal suspicion, and I think a lot of people share this view, is that the 493 square mile camera network was there to basically raise revenue for Labour projects. So it's just a way of a stealth tax.
And what Labour projects would they be?
Well, I think by law they are limited to you have to spend it on transport related items. I mean, they seem to be obsessed with cycle lanes, and as a keen cyclist myself, and I worked in Bury for 3 or 4 years, and I used to cycle from the centre of Sale to the centre of Bury on cycle route 6, which meant I did an 18-mile journey, and I only did 2 miles of that on road. Right, most of it was on canal towpaths and disused railway lines. I would never countenance going down the A56 with or without a cycle lane, because it's so dangerous, even with the protection. Why would you want to go and cycle on that traffic? And now we're seeing proposals on all these arterial roads in and out of Manchester to actually lose a lane, a whole lane for a cycle lane, and it just seems crazy to me in a city where car use is so high relative to other areas of the UK.
And after the Client Earth lawsuits, you have to put something in place. So what would be your alternative?
I think where we're going to end up on this is the proposal that Andy Burnham has put forward to government is for a non-charging zone in the centres of Manchester and Salford, alongside a lot of investment in taxis, some taxis and some buses, to basically make them non-emitting anymore. I don't think that will pass the required standard, and the government will say to them, you need to rethink this, and they will have to implement a charging zone in those areas, because if you don't implement a charging zone, it won't discourage all those private vehicles that will come in, that will pollute. So you've got to address those and somehow to get the clean air levels to improve them. So I think that's the solution we should have started with 3, 4, 5 years ago. And we've already now spent £100 million. It's forecast to go up to 200 million. We could have had a tiny camera network in the centre of Manchester, in the centre of Salford, and spent that money elsewhere.
And the policy is under review by an independent body,
Yes.
right? So what would you get rid of that independent body if you become mayor?
No, I think that you need those checks and balances. I think personally, the 493 square mile clean air zone was never meant to just address clean air. I think it was meant to be a way of And it's an anti-car policy. It's a way of raising revenue. It's a way of implementing future things like pay per mile, like 15-minute cities, like the ULEZ expansion we've seen in London, which has been, raised so much revenue for Mayor Khan, but without public consent. And I think that's where we've lost here. The public don't support these policies.
And what happens if the Greater Manchester Air Quality Administration Committee says that this sort of policy at this sort of scale is needed?
Well, I think they'd have to justify it with data. And so far, the data has not been very clear. How can you go from Wigan and Tameside being the hotspots only a short while ago to now it being Manchester and Salford? I don't believe that data has been published fully. And I would question, given the big question mark over the whole scheme, why that's not the case. That would have happened elsewhere, I think.
On this committee, there's, no Conservative councillors. There's Labour councillors, Lib Dem councillors, but no Conservative councillors. Is that a problem?
Well, I think it probably reflects the makeup of the council to some degree. For the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, 9 out of the 10 councils are Labour-run. The 10th is Liberal Democrats. There are Conservative politicians in amongst all that. I think it would certainly help to have a better mix of parties, because the public would get the benefit of more accountability, with the different viewpoints. So I think that's probably one for the GMCA to kind of think on that one.
I'm moving on from Kaz. How will you get Greater Manchester Police out of special measures?
Well, I think when I look at the role of Police and Crime Commissioner, in the last 7 years we've gone into special measures. Thankfully, we've come out of special measures due to the work of Chief Constable Stephen Watson, and I believe he did a similar turnaround in South Yorkshire, which is why he was brought into this job. So he's got a track record in turning around failing police forces. And we've still got crime levels at a 7-year high now, and I look at this and I wonder why, as the Mayor and as the ultimate duty holder, why Andy Burnham didn't take the reins on the Police and Crime Commissioner role and pass some of his other duties to his other deputies. So, for example, we've had Bev Hughes, now it's Kate Green, who's the Police and Crime Commissioner, whilst he's been working on transport. I'm not saying transport isn't important, but I think I would have swapped that round and said someone else pick up transport portfolio. I need to get crime, back under control here.
So off your website, am I right in believing that you would take ownership of the police and crime sort of role instead of the deputy mayor?
I would, at least until the crime levels were starting to fall significantly, and the public were reassured about crime levels and the performance of GMP. I think that's definitely, when there was a problem like that, is to lean into it rather than, pass the buck to a deputy.
And the deputy mayor gets paid quite a lot for their role.
Yes.
So if you're would you have a deputy mayor at first if there's not a case for one because you're taking over the police and crime?
I think I definitely look at the whole kind of office and staff that surrounds the mayor, because I wonder, with 2 or 3 deputy mayors, some of them are already heads of the combined authorities, so they're already leaders of the councils. But what are they doing? Can they really justify the wage bill for all of those, particularly in a cost of living crisis? Is it people on over 6-figure salaries? And how busy are they really?
So would you appoint a deputy mayor at first if you were to come in?
I think I would I wouldn't rule out having a deputy mayor because I think for a city of the size of Manchester, 2.8 million people and 10 authorities, I think the portfolio is quite big. I think my difference between myself and say Andy Burnham is where my focus would be what's important now. I'd say transport is important, but I think when crime is soaring, then the Police and Crime Commissioner role should be number one priority.
And like you say, you would look at having a deputy mayor, but what would they be in charge of? What would their portfolio entail of?
Well, I would say there's some of the other areas of responsibility. So I think things like the homelessness portfolio, I think, is with Salford City Mayor Paul Dennett. Obviously, he's already got a role as an elected official. There's as well as the police, there's the fire and rescue services, which is sort of combined into the police and commissioner role, and then of course transport as well.
And who would your deputy mayor be?
It's a good question. I couldn't say today who that will be. I mean, obviously...
Is he in this room?
Yeah. No, I don't think so.
Laura Evans?
Laura it would be a possible, yes. Laura's definitely got a lot to offer, yeah.
And moving on from that, but what untapped potential do you see in Manchester?
Sorry, say again.
What untapped potential do you see in Manchester?
So I see, that if you look at where we were from, say, the IRA bombing in the 90s, the turnaround generally, the general trend for Manchester has undoubtedly been upwards, in the way the city's grown. We had the Beetham Tower in the sort of early noughties, and at the time when that was built, that was, what an iconic building and how it changed the landscape. And if you look at the city centre now, it's been rapidly dwarfed by a number of other buildings around it, and I think that trend's going to continue.
So is it?
So in terms of untapped potential, I see that the city centre's doing rather well. It looks quite good. It's quite cool. There's a lot of nice places there, lots of shops and restaurants. What I think is, look at all the other areas in Greater Manchester. How have they fared? And how is about lifting all the boats, not just the ones in the city centre.
And would you have to raise money for that, or would you just change the budgets around for different departments?
I think, I would say there's obviously there's funds you get from central government. How you spend those would impact, how things could change. But there's also, encouraging private industry to invest, and bring their baser operations here. For example, Tameside, it's been kind of left behind for so long now, in terms of there's a great potential for the workforce there. Tesla, could we have made overtures to Tesla or a company like that to come and base one of their operations in the Tameside area? And that's the sort of thing, offer incentives for that kind of investment.
And budget-wise, what's the difference between you and Andy Burnham?
So I think I would certainly, I don't think you'd be spending any less money than you got from central governments, but I would certainly be looking at how that money's spent. Could be spent more efficiently? Is there potential for cost savings that could be spent on frontline services? Every Labour government and administration that's been in power, at the end of it, tends to have a bloated, staff bill, and there's no money left. And I would certainly want to, make sure that's not the case for Manchester.
And Rishi Sunak, the Tory leader, what has he done to better Manchester?
So I think he has, as the Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party, he's presided over, these devolution deals and this general trend of providing more money, more powers to Greater Manchester.
And what are your thoughts on Network North?
So I think Network North is a good thing. I think joining up the cities in the north is going to be undoubtedly positive, and Manchester's at the heart of all that. So I'm a big supporter of it.
Are you also, or were you a supporter of HS2?
Well, listen, I was disappointed, like many, when I heard the news that we weren't going to get high speed rail all the way to London. But if you think about what do we actually need, I used to travel regularly to London from Stockport, and you get on at the Stockport station, and in less than 2 hours you could be in Euston if you went on the express. And actually, that's quite quick. You can do that, and I'd often go back there and back in a day, no problem. And what for the savings we would get by having the link from Manchester to London, I think we'd only save about 40 minutes on that. So was it worth the money that we were going to have to spend on it? And I think the decision that was made, given the other opportunities like Network North, was the right one. And I think it was quite a bold decision by Rishi Sunak, because the overwhelming, there was so many vested interests that said we need to finish the project because we've all, kind of stuck our neck out here. And he said, no, this isn't the right thing. It's not the right thing for the UK. It's not the right thing for Manchester.
And he announced he was going to scrap HS2 at the Conservative Party conference. I was actually at the Conservative Party conference, and I could see the mood of some of the northern councillors or northern Tories, that they didn't really like that decision.
No, I think, and I can understand why they might have reacted like that. They might, because they, anticipation that there would be a negative reaction, and I think that was definitely, the Labour administration, including Andy Burnham, tried to capitalise on that. the truth is, the alternatives that the North is going to receive in terms of Network North and all the road investments is actually better, and we'll get the benefits sooner.
And going away now from HS2 and Network North, but do you believe you have a chance of winning this election?
Well, I think if you're in the race, then it's always possible for you to win. I won't deny, this is a Labour stronghold, Greater Manchester, and to a degree it always has been. However, I'd question who is the real candidate here. Is it Andy Burnham, or is it actually the person who's going to be in office if Labour, a Labour mayor is re-elected, is one of his existing deputies or somebody else?
And do you think you're going to get over 25% of the vote at least?
I will try and get as many votes as possible, yes. And just on the voting side, last time, and I know what Laura got and what Sean Anstey got, but, the turnout wasn't brilliant. And if you look at the figures, only 1 in 5 people voted for Andy Burnham last time. Now, there could be factors in that, because it was COVID or so coming out of COVID. But it's not an amazing endorsement on the whole mayoral office when so few people vote for it. So I do wonder whether after 7 years, people are questioning what's the value of a mayor to Greater Manchester. And I think that's, you've got to, Labour and Andy Burnham need to look in the mirror on that one.
And how are you going to win over the youth vote?
So I think, Manchester's quite a young city generally, and there's, in the city centre definitely there's lots of young people and lots of young professionals. So I think making sure that our policies take their needs into account, their slightly different worldview than I think some people from older generations, So I think just need to make sure we accommodate their views as well.
And before you said that only 1 in 5 people voted for Andy Burnham. Was that true?
Is it true?
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, stats are published online, so you can see that from the last election. Yeah.
So we know your thoughts on Andy Burnham, but what do you think about Nick Buckley, the independent candidate?
So I've met with Nick, and we had a chat in a pub in Sale. It was a very pleasant meeting. He seems like a decent guy. I think he is, just chatting to him and hearing about his policies and his bit about his life story. I would say he is a Conservative at heart. So I know he stood for reform last time. Now he's standing independently, and obviously he's got his Substack, which I've signed on to. I like some of his articles. I think we're on the same page on lots of things. So. Yes, I would say he's a Conservative personally. Yeah.
Could that lead to a vote split within Manchester, Greater Manchester?
I think he will get some votes for no other reason than he's his second time out now, and apart from Andy Burnham, I don't think anyone else has stood twice. So his name recognition will be going up. I think sounds like he's working quite hard on his campaign, and I certainly think he's got a base. Yes, there's no doubt about that.
And for the last 5 minutes, could we just talk about some local issues? So what are your thoughts on the pro-Palestine protests going on right now?
So I glad to say that my own personal preference aligns with the Conservative government stance on kind of Israel. I must say, I want to comment on this actually. I do think that the joint declaration that was signed by the leaders of, primarily the Labour Council and Andy Burnham, supporting a ceasefire, I thought it was unnecessary, and I thought it was crass, because we have we've got a significant Jewish population in more than one area of Manchester, around here, and also in the north of the city, and I do wonder, given that foreign policy is reserved to Westminster, there was no need for them to make a statement either way, why they did that and how it made that Jewish community feel when they saw the local elected officials taking a stance like that, taking a side on something like that.
And do you think some of these protests are violent or not necessary?
I certainly think, if I was police and crime commissioner and those sort of protests were taking place in Manchester, I would be saying to the police, the Chief Constable, I will back you to enforce the law, particularly in relation to hate crime. So the stance on from the river to the sea, I think that's unacceptable. There's no way you can look at that and think that is about anything else other than driving the Jews out of Israel.
And one of the final local issues, what do you think about the Greater Manchester Combined Authority?
I think it's dominated by Labour, and it has been for a long time now. Some of those councils, I think, are on the edge, of control. They could fall to become Conservative quite easily, and we've got elections in May. I don't think it's a bad structure. I think, it's only as good as the people who are in it, really. But I think it's, Greater Manchester, it should, we should work better for them, for the people of Greater Manchester.